known to those she helped as Dede, was instrumental in arranging the evacuation of many Allied service personnel who, for one reason or another, found themselves stranded in enemy-occupied territory in Western Europe.
But really, it was so wonderful for us during all the war to feel how much we could hope in England.
In the 1940s, the Hitler forces had by then overrun the Low Countries. Allied planes tore through the clouds overhead, coming and going from bombing raids on Germany, dodging anti-aircraft fire from below. In 4 years, hundreds of Allied planes, most belonging to Britain's Royal Air Force, would go down over Belgium. Those airmen who survived landed in farmers' fields, in apple trees, on rooftops. They cut themselves loose from their chutes, knowing that they were behind enemy lines, that their fate now lay in their ability to disappear. Hidden in a house in Brussels with 2 other rescued airmen midway through 1941, Newton was told of the Comet escape line, a risky new route being used to evacuate Allied soldiers through the heart of occupied Europe from Belgium to France, and then into neutral Spain. It was a journey of more than 600 miles, involving long rides on German-patrolled trains, stealthy border crossings, and a grueling nighttime trek over the Pyrenees. And then their hearts sank when a wispy young woman strolled into the room. Andrée de Jongh had dark, fluffy hair, a pert mouth, and high-arching eyebrows. She wore a flowered dress and white ankle socks. She was 24 but looked 18, weighing about 100 pounds. She seemed to take up no space at all. She introduced herself only as Dede, a nickname. Our lives, and at that time, they depended on that schoolgirl. Dede was a woman of extraordinary courage. Born on November 30th, 1916 in Schaerbeek, Belgium, she would go on to lead one of the most daring and successful escape networks of the war, known as the Comet Line. This network helped save the lives of more than 800 Allied airmen, resistance fighters, and Jews, making her one of the most revered figures in the annals of wartime heroism. Her life is a testament to the power of the human spirit to resist oppression, even in the face of unimaginable danger. Andrée's early life was shaped by the First World War, which left deep scars on Belgium. Her father, Edith de Jongh, was a schoolteacher with strong anti-German sentiments, and her mother, Alice, was a nurse who had been active in helping Belgian refugees. This upbringing in a patriotic and socially conscious household planted the seeds of resistance in Andrée from a young age. She was an intelligent and compassionate child, deeply affected by the stories of suffering and heroism she heard from her parents. This sense of empathy and justice would later drive her to take incredible risks in the fight against Hitler forces' tyranny. When World War II broke out in 1939, Andrée was working as a nurse in Malmedy, a small town in eastern Belgium. Like many of her compatriots, she was horrified by the Hitler forces' invasion of her homeland in May 1940. The occupation brought with it a wave of repression and terror, particularly against the Jewish population. The sight of Jews being rounded up and deported to concentration camps profoundly shocked Andrée. She knew she could not stand by and do nothing while innocent people were being persecuted. Driven by a fierce sense of duty, she decided to join the resistance. In 1941, Andrée de Jongh became involved in helping British soldiers and airmen who had been shot down over occupied Europe. The British government had made it clear that the escape and evasion of these men were of paramount importance. Every man who made it back to Britain could potentially return to the fight against the Hitler forces, and their safe return was a significant blow to German morale. Andrée understood this well, but her motivation went beyond patriotism or military strategy. She saw in these men, many of whom were barely older than boys, the same helplessness and fear that she had seen in the Jewish refugees. She was determined to help them, no matter the cost. With the support of her father, Andrée began to organize an escape network that would eventually become known as the Comet Line. The network's purpose was to guide downed Allied airmen and other fugitives from occupied Belgium through France and over the Pyrenees Mountains into neutral Spain, from where they could be repatriated to Britain. It was an incredibly dangerous undertaking. The Gestapo and other German forces were constantly on the lookout for resistance members, and anyone caught aiding the enemy faced certain demise. But Andrée was undeterred. The Comet Line was meticulously organized. Andrée used her skills as a nurse to move around Belgium without arousing suspicion, pretending to be a Red Cross worker or a nurse traveling to care for patients in remote areas. She would meet with airmen, often in the dead of night, and provide them with false papers, disguises, and instructions. The journey to Spain was perilous, involving long treks through forests, crossing rivers, and scaling the treacherous Pyrenees Mountains. The airmen had to be physically and mentally prepared for the journey, and Andrée's calm and reassuring presence was often the only thing keeping them going. One of the most remarkable aspects of Andrée's work was her ability to maintain the Comet Line's secrecy. The network operated on a need-to-know basis, with each member only aware of their specific role and the people they directly interacted with. This compartmentalization was crucial in protecting the network from being compromised. Andrée herself was known by the code name Dédé, and few people knew her true identity or the extent of her involvement. Andrée's bravery was matched only by her resourcefulness. On one occasion, she managed to smuggle an airman out of a hospital where he was being treated under the watchful eyes of German guards. Disguised as a doctor, she walked into the hospital with a stretcher and, with the help of a sympathetic nurse, wheeled the airman out, claiming that he needed to be transferred to another facility. The German guards, convinced by her confident demeanor and the legitimacy of her papers, let her pass without question. It was a daring move, and it worked perfectly. Another story that highlights Andrée's character involved a young British pilot who had been shot down over Belgium. The pilot was badly injured and in desperate need of medical attention. Andrée, with her nursing background, tended to his wounds herself, knowing that taking him to a hospital would almost certainly lead to his capture. For weeks, she nursed him back to health, all the while keeping him hidden in a safe house. The pilot later recalled that Andrée's kindness and care were what kept him alive during those dark days. The Comet Line was a lifeline for many, but it was not without its costs. The work took a tremendous toll on Andrée and her fellow resistance members. They lived in constant fear of betrayal, knowing that a single slip-up could mean demise for them and those they were helping. The pressure was immense, but Andrée remained resolute. Her father, who was deeply involved in the network, was eventually captured by the Gestapo and executed in 1944. The loss was devastating for Andrée, but it only strengthened her resolve to continue the fight. The work of the Comet Line did not go unnoticed by the German authorities. The Gestapo launched a relentless campaign to infiltrate and destroy the network, capturing and torturing many of its members. In January 1943, Andrée herself was arrested in a trap set by the Gestapo in Urugna, a small village near the French-Spanish border. She was interrogated and tortured for months, but she never betrayed her comrades or revealed any details about the Comet Line. The Gestapo, frustrated by her silence, eventually sent her to the Ravensbrück concentration camp in Germany, where she endured appalling conditions. In the winter of 1942, Andrée de Jongh received word about a Jewish family living in hiding in Brussels. The Myers family, consisting of parents Isaac and Miriam and their two young children, Samuel and Rachel, had been living in constant fear since the Hitler forces' occupation. Isaac had been a well-respected tailor in the Jewish community, but when the Germans began their brutal crackdown on Jews, he was forced to abandon his shop and take his family into hiding. Their situation was dire. The small attic they occupied in a sympathetic Belgian's home was cramped and food was scarce. The constant threat of discovery by the Gestapo made every day a terrifying ordeal. Isaac and Miriam knew they could not stay hidden forever. They needed a way out of Belgium and to a place where they could be safe from the Hitler forces' reach. The Comet Line, led by Andrée de Jongh, was their only hope. Through a network of trusted contacts, the Myers were put in touch with Andrée. She arranged to meet them in a safe house on the outskirts of Brussels, where she could assess their situation and plan their escape. This was no small task. Guiding a family with two small children across occupied Belgium and into France would be incredibly dangerous. When Andrée met the Myers family, she was struck by their plight. The children were pale and thin, their eyes wide with fear. Miriam was exhausted, her face lined with worry. Isaac, though desperate, maintained a stoic demeanor, determined to protect his family at all costs. Andrée knew that getting them to safety would be a challenge, but she was determined to help them. The first step was to move the family from Brussels to a safe house closer to the French border. This was easier said than done. The Germans had increased their patrols, and there were checkpoints at every major road. Andrée decided to split the family into two groups. She would take Samuel and Rachel first, while another trusted member of the Comet Line, known only as Henri, would escort Isaac and Miriam the following day. Andrée disguised herself as a nurse, carrying forged Red Cross papers that allowed her to travel under the pretext of transporting sick children to a hospital in the countryside. She dressed Samuel and Rachel in oversized coats and hats, making them look as inconspicuous as possible. The journey was fraught with danger. At every checkpoint, Andrée's heart pounded as she presented her papers, praying that the German soldiers would not become suspicious. One particularly harrowing moment came when they were stopped by a German officer who demanded to see inside the vehicle. Andrée remained calm, explaining that the children were very ill and needed urgent medical attention. Samuel, understanding the gravity of the situation, began to cough weakly, while Rachel clung to Andrée, feigning sickness. The officer hesitated, seemingly convinced by their act, and waved them through. Andrée's quick thinking and the children's bravery had saved them. The family was successfully reunited at the safe house, but the journey was far from over. The next phase involved crossing into France, a journey that would take them through forests, over rivers, and across treacherous terrain, all under the cover of darkness. Andrée, with her extensive knowledge of the escape routes, led the way. One cold, moonless night, the group set out for the French border. Andrée knew that this part of the journey would be the most dangerous. They had to avoid German patrols and make their way through the Ardennes forest, a dense and rugged area that was heavily monitored by the Hitler forces. The children, exhausted and frightened, struggled to keep up, but Andrée's reassuring presence and gentle encouragement kept them going. As they neared the border, they encountered a German patrol. There was no time to hide. They were in an open area with no cover. Thinking quickly, Andrée instructed the family to drop to the ground and remain still. She then began to walk slowly towards the patrol, her hands raised, feigning surrender. The soldiers, surprised by her sudden appearance, demanded to know who she was and what she was doing. Andrée, always quick on her feet, spun a story about being a local guide who had lost her way while looking for firewood. The soldiers, suspicious but uncertain, questioned her for what felt like an eternity. Meanwhile, the Myers family lay motionless, holding their breath, their hearts pounding in their chests. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the soldiers decided she was harmless and let her go. Andrée rejoined the family, and they continued their journey in silence. Eventually, after several more hours of walking, they crossed the border into France. The Myers family was exhausted, but they were safe, for the time being. Andrée arranged for them to be taken to a safe house in the French countryside, where they would wait for the next leg of their journey to Spain. The Myers family eventually made it to Spain and, from there, to neutral Portugal, where they were able to secure passage to America. They survived the war, thanks to Andrée de Jongh's incredible bravery and determination. The memory of that harrowing journey stayed with them for the rest of their lives, a testament to the courage of the young Belgian woman who had risked everything to save them. Sarah Goldstein was a young Jewish woman from Antwerp who had been living in hiding with her family since the Hitler forces began their occupation of Belgium. Her father, a prominent Jewish lawyer, had been arrested and deported to a concentration camp early in the war, leaving Sarah, her mother Leah, and her younger brother David to fend for themselves. They had been moving from one safe house to another, always just one step ahead of the Gestapo. By the time they were put in contact with Andrée de Jongh, the situation had become desperate. The German authorities were intensifying their efforts to capture Jews, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to find places where the family could stay hidden. The only viable option left was to leave Belgium altogether, but the journey out of the country was fraught with danger, especially for Sarah, whose striking features made it impossible for her to pass as anything other than Jewish. When Andrée met Sarah, she immediately recognized the challenges they faced. Sarah was tall and slender, with dark, expressive eyes and a distinctive aristocratic air that made her stand out. Andrée knew that the usual methods of disguise, false papers, a change of clothes, and a different hairstyle, would not be enough to protect Sarah from the scrutinizing eyes of the German soldiers. Undeterred, Andrée devised a bold plan. She decided to disguise Sarah as a nun, a role that would allow her to move freely across Belgium and into France without arousing suspicion. It was a risky strategy, as the Hitler forces were known to interrogate religious figures they suspected of aiding the resistance. But Andrée believed that Sarah's composed demeanor and intelligence would help her pull off the disguise. The first step was to obtain a nun's habit. Andrée used her contacts within the resistance to acquire the necessary garments, and she instructed Sarah on how to wear them properly. Sarah was nervous. She had never worn anything like it before, but Andrée's calm and confident demeanor reassured her. They practiced for days, with Sarah learning how to walk, speak, and behave like a nun. She adopted the name Sister Maria and learned a few basic phrases in Latin to help her maintain the ruse if questioned. The journey began in the early hours of the morning, when the streets were still dark and the German patrols were less frequent. Andrée, dressed as a civilian nurse, accompanied Sister Maria on what would be a perilous journey through occupied Belgium. Their first challenge came when they had to cross a heavily guarded bridge over the Meuse River. The bridge was a strategic point for the Germans, and it was manned by a group of soldiers who were notorious for their brutality. As they approached the checkpoint, Andrée's heart raced. She knew that if the soldiers became suspicious, their lives would be in grave danger, but she remained outwardly calm, offering a silent prayer as they drew closer. When they reached the checkpoint, one of the soldiers barked at them to halt and demanded to see their papers. Andrée handed over the forged documents, explaining that she was escorting Sister Maria to a convent in the south of France, where she was to take her final vows. The soldier scrutinized the papers, his eyes narrowing as he looked from Andrée to Sarah. Andrée held her breath, fearing that he would see through their disguise. But Sarah, now fully inhabiting the role of Sister Maria, kept her gaze lowered, her hands clasped in a prayerful position. The soldier, perhaps convinced by Sarah's piety or simply uninterested in harassing a nun, returned the papers and waved them through. It was a narrow escape, but it strengthened Sarah's resolve. She knew that her life depended on maintaining her disguise, and she was determined not to falter. As they continued their journey, the road became more treacherous. The Hitler forces had set up roadblocks on all the major routes, and Andrée had to navigate a labyrinth of back roads and forest paths to avoid detection. On more than one occasion, they were forced to hide in the underbrush as German patrols passed by, their footsteps echoing ominously in the silence. One particularly terrifying moment came when they were forced to take refuge in a small barn on the outskirts of a village that was known to harbor Hitler forces sympathizers. They had been walking for hours, and Sarah was exhausted, her feet blistered and sore. Andrée knew they couldn't continue without rest, but she also knew that staying in one place for too long increased the risk of discovery. As they huddled in the darkness of the barn, they heard voices outside, German soldiers conducting a search of the village. Andrée motioned for Sarah to stay quiet, pressing her finger to her lips. The soldiers' voices grew louder, and they could hear the sound of doors being kicked open as the Germans searched house after house. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, and she clutched the rosary beads that Andrée had given her as part of her disguise. The soldiers approached the barn, their boots crunching on the gravel outside. Andrée and Sarah held their breath, hoping that the soldiers would pass by without investigating further. But their hopes were dashed when the barn door creaked open, and a beam of light from a flashlight swept across the interior. Andrée's mind raced. There was no way out. They were trapped. But she refused to give in to panic. In a split second, she decided to gamble everything on their disguise. As the flashlight beam landed on them, Andrée stepped forward, putting herself between Sarah and the soldiers. "Sister Maria is in prayer," Andrée said in a firm but calm voice, using the most authoritative tone she could muster. "We seek only shelter for the night before continuing our journey to the convent." The German soldier holding the flashlight hesitated, clearly taken aback by Andrée's composure and the sight of a nun in the darkened barn. For a moment, he seemed unsure of how to proceed. Andrée held her breath, hoping that the soldier's uncertainty would work in their favor. After what felt like an eternity, the soldier lowered his flashlight and muttered something to his companion. The two men exchanged a glance. Then, to Andrée's immense relief, they turned and left the barn without another word. The door creaked shut behind them, and the sound of their footsteps faded into the night. Andrée and Sarah waited in silence until they were certain the soldiers were gone. Only then did they allow themselves to breathe. It had been a close call, perhaps the closest they had faced yet, but they had survived. Sarah, though shaken, was more determined than ever to see the journey through to the end. The following days were filled with more challenges, but none as harrowing as that night in the barn. Andrée guided Sarah through the French countryside, using her extensive knowledge of the escape routes to avoid detection. They eventually made it to the Pyrenees, where they were met by a local guide who would take them across the mountains into Spain. Crossing the Pyrenees was an ordeal in itself. The mountains were steep and treacherous, and the weather was unforgiving. Sarah, though exhausted, pushed herself to keep going, knowing that safety lay on the other side. Andrée, ever the encourager, stayed by her side, offering words of comfort and support. When they finally crossed the border into Spain, both women were near the point of collapse, but they had made it. Sarah was taken to a safe house in San Sebastian, where she was given food, rest, and new clothes. From there, she was able to make contact with the British consulate, who arranged for her safe passage to Lisbon, and eventually to England. Sarah survived the war, and she never forgot the woman who had saved her life. By 1943, the Hitler forces' persecution of Jews in Belgium had reached its peak. The Germans were relentless in their efforts to round up and deport every Jew they could find, sending them to the demise camps in the east. In Antwerp, the situation was particularly dire. The city's Jewish community had been decimated, and those who remained lived in constant fear of discovery. Among them were a group of 10 Jewish children, ranging in age from 3 to 14, who had been orphaned when their parents were taken by the Hitler forces. The children had been hidden by various members of the Belgian resistance, moving from one hiding place to another in a desperate attempt to stay one step ahead of the Gestapo. But with the net tightening around them, it became clear that they could not stay in Antwerp any longer. They needed to be smuggled out of the city and taken to safety in the south of France, where they could be placed in the care of a sympathetic orphanage. The task of organizing their escape fell to Andrée de Jongh. She knew that transporting 10 children across occupied Belgium was an almost impossible challenge, but she also knew that if they stayed in Antwerp, they would almost certainly be caught and deported. The Comet Line had helped adults escape before, but this mission was different. Children were far more vulnerable, and the risk of betrayal was higher. But Andrée was undeterred. She was determined to save these children, no matter the cost. Andrée began by identifying safe houses along the route to the French border, places where the children could rest and hide during the day. The plan was to move them in small groups under cover of darkness, using the back roads and forest paths that Andrée knew so well. Each child was given a false identity and a cover story, and they were taught how to behave if questioned by the Germans. Andrée impressed upon them the importance of staying quiet and following instructions, but she also made sure they understood that they were going to a place where they would be safe. The night of the escape was cold and moonless, providing the perfect cover for their journey. Andrée, accompanied by 2 other members of the Comet Line, gathered the children at a safe house on the outskirts of Antwerp. The youngest, a 3-year-old boy named David, clung to Andrée's hand, his eyes wide with fear. Andrée knelt down beside him, reassuring him that everything would be all right. The first group to leave consisted of the oldest children, who were more capable of walking long distances. Andrée led them through the dark streets, avoiding the main roads and staying in the shadows. The children were silent, their faces pale with fear, but they followed Andrée without hesitation. They trusted her completely. As they approached the first safe house, disaster struck. A German patrol appeared out of nowhere, blocking their path. Andrée's heart raced as she quickly assessed the situation. There was no time to run, and hiding was not an option with so many children. She had to think fast. In a calm, authoritative voice, Andrée instructed the children to act as though they were on a pilgrimage to a local shrine, a common practice in Catholic Belgium. She began to lead them in prayer, softly singing a hymn that she had taught them earlier. The German soldiers, hearing the hymn, were momentarily confused. They approached the group, their flashlights illuminating the children's faces. Andrée remained calm, continuing the hymn without missing a beat. The soldiers, perhaps unwilling to interfere with a group of children and their caretaker, hesitated. One of them asked Andrée where they were going, and she replied that they were on their way to the shrine of Our Lady of Lourdes, a revered pilgrimage site. The soldiers exchanged glances, clearly uncertain. After a tense moment, they waved the group through, allowing them to continue their journey. The close call left the children shaken, but Andrée's calm demeanor reassured them. She led them safely to the first safe house, where they were able to rest and eat before continuing on the next leg of the journey. Over the next few nights, Andrée repeated the process with the remaining children, guiding them through the dark and dangerous roads of occupied Belgium. The journey was grueling, particularly for the younger children. They had to walk for miles, often in freezing temperatures, and the constant fear of discovery weighed heavily on them. But Andrée's unwavering determination and gentle encouragement kept them going. She carried the youngest children when they were too tired to walk, whispering stories and songs to soothe their fears. At one point, the group had to cross a river using a small, rickety boat. The river was fast-flowing and icy cold, and the children were terrified. Andrée, understanding their fear, crossed first with the oldest child, showing the others that it was safe. She made several trips back and forth, ferrying the children across the river one by one, until they were all safely on the other side. The final leg of the journey took them across the French border and into the safety of the unoccupied zone. The children, exhausted but relieved, were placed in the care of the orphanage that Andrée had arranged for them. They were given warm beds, hot meals, and the chance to begin a new life, far from the horrors of Hitler forces-occupied Belgium. For Andrée, the successful escape of the children was one of her greatest achievements. She had risked everything to save them, knowing that if they had been caught, they would have faced certain demise. The children, too, never forgot the woman who had saved their lives. They grew up knowing that they owed their survival to Andrée de Jongh, the fearless leader of the Comet Line. Despite the unimaginable suffering she endured, Andrée's spirit remained unbroken. She continued to resist in whatever small ways she could, even within the confines of the camp. Her resilience and courage inspired her fellow prisoners, many of whom looked to her as a source of strength. Andrée survived the war, and when Ravensbrück was liberated by the Allies in April 1945, she returned to Belgium. Her survival was nothing short of miraculous, given the horrors she had endured. After the war, Andrée de Jongh was honored by several governments for her extraordinary contributions to the Allied war effort. She was awarded the George Medal by the British government, the Presidential Medal of Freedom by the United States, and the Croix de Guerre by France. Despite these accolades, Andrée remained humble, insisting that she had only done what was necessary. She never sought recognition or fame, preferring instead to live a quiet life away from the public eye. After the war, some of the children reunited with Andrée, expressing their deep gratitude for the courage and kindness she had shown them. Their stories, like so many others, are a testament to Andrée's incredible heroism and the profound impact she had on the lives of those she helped. She remained a symbol of hope and resistance, a shining example of what it means to stand up for what is right, even in the darkest of times.